Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the latest in our webcast series. I think you'll recognize that little image. Are you missing something in purchase to pay? And obviously, in this particular example, there's a few things missing, and begs the question how you get in the car. Very, very shiny, nice looking. But we're going to get on with the topic of the day. So my name's Dan French. I'm founder and CEO at Consider Solutions. I'm the unhappy one on the left. I sometimes look happier than that. And I know many of you have been around quite a while, so welcome to those of you who I know, and welcome to everyone else also. I'm very pleased to be joined by Steve Fox, who's former Vice President GBS at Thermo Fisher Scientific and is now the Process Excellence Leader at Consider Solutions. Welcome, Steve, all the way from Southern California.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Great to be here.
Good, thanks. It's good to have you, Steve. Thank you. So this is what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to give a few introductions and talk a little bit about global end-to-end processes and the purchase-to-pay landscape. And you'll realize some of the issues we are seeing in terms of this missing link in purchase-to-pay also applies to other processes as well. But this is very focused today on P2P. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's missing. I'm going to ask Steve to give us the benefit of his experience in how he's identified and addressed the missing link in P2P. This is about the very focus of this talk. And then I'm going to come around with how we apply what we've learned. This is a 40-minute webcast. We're hoping it to be 30 minutes, but realistically it's 40. And there are questions at the end. So there is a panel. If you want to ask questions as we go through, and I encourage you to do so, there's a panel on your GoToWebinar interface. Please pop the questions in there, and we'll try and answer them at the end. Those we can't answer, we'll do by email. If you've got technical questions, use the same mechanism. So that's our agenda. In terms of the context, those of you that know us will recognize this, but it's kind of important, if you don't know us, to understand kind of how it is we approach these kind of questions and these issues. And we're definitely of the focus of helping organizations down this road of achieving best-in-class or world-class finance and operations, which is all about helping the business drive the best business results, reduce the cost of operations, optimize cash flow, and have better risk management. And we deliver that through these pillars on the right. And today is very much about process optimization, process transformation, specifically in P2P. And we get challenged regularly by our customers and the business partners to kind of answer questions about, is there a better way? How do we understand the nature of process and technology enablement, and what can we learn? So these folks and others challenge us on a regular basis to with kind of some of the nitty-gritty unpleasantness of business, and which kind of gives rise to webcasts like this. So thank you all, many of you are here. So there's going to be a few polls, keep you involved, keep you awake. First one is very simple. How would you describe your role? So not necessarily what's on your email footer or your business card, but do you self-describe as, are you one, primarily shared services GBS person, two, you primarily identify as procurement, three, you identify as finance, four, identify as IT or IS, and five, other. So just one of those. Obviously you could be in multiple, but just choose your primary thing. And that kind of helps us and helps you work out in what company you are, and also helps us validate some of the, or give some texture to some of the questions, some of the other polls we're going to get. So we're just trying to get a sense of the audience here today. So one, shared services GBS, two, procurement, three, finance, four, IT, IS, and five, other. So okay, understandably, the largest group is shared services GBS, followed by finance. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So thank you for that. Expect a couple of more polls. Keep your finger ready. So global end-to-end processes and purchase pay landscape. So it is, when you look at these global processes, there's a big impact of shared services and global business services, and for those of you without those, in finance operations. And we've spent time with leaders around the world just asking key questions about, what do your executive stakeholders, typically the CFO and the CEO, what do they demand of you and of your organization? And these are the five. There's no real debate about it. It's direct cost reduction through those mechanisms in the red, improving business unit experience by those elements, enhancing risk management, control and compliance, issue resolution, and preserving process knowledge. Now, you can play with priorities, although most people would say direct cost reduction is their primary demanded outcome. But but yeah, there's not much to argue there with the content. What's more interesting is we also ask these folks that, you're an experienced executive in your own right. What do you personally aspire to as an outcome for shared services or global business services? And this is where it gets interesting. So number one is enhancing the reputation as a value creator as well as a cost reducer, because you can't cost to reduce your way to success ad infinitum. So that's really key. That related to that is becoming a center of excellence with the expertise to optimize and automate as well as operate. Now that's kind of interesting. So we know there's a lot of transformation, continuous improvement, process improvement going on in GBS and shared services. And there's also a kind of interesting question about where the relationship and where the responsibility and the governance is between GBS and the IT function, the CIO, for example. Third one, which is part of this big question, very related to today's topic, is end-to-end business process collaboration. I've avoided the use of the word ownership because there's lots of questions about, do we really own the processes end-to-end? Does anyone really own them? But end-to-end business process collaboration is a big, big thing, and GBS and shared services should be enabling that. Digitizing integrated processes, that's key. And then becoming a talent pipeline for the entire business. And I would suggest if you do the other four, you are a talent pipeline for the entire business. Everyone's going to want your best people. So that's kind of some context. And part of that global process collaboration, global process enablement is a core value creating strategy. We all agree that whilst GBS and shared services may not own the full end-to-end process, it definitely is in a great position to be the center of gravity, the catalyst for making sure that collaboration and enablement happens. So it's complex, it's global, it's all across all functions, it's got lots of stakeholders, lots of technology, all that good stuff. So, that's kind of a pretty much a kind of key definition there. Now, when we look at purchase to pay, or more correctly in its full value chain, source to pay, we all recognize this, right? So sourcing, buying, paying, and most folks on the GBS and shared services side are primarily owning and executing the settlement side, payables, all the rest of it. But if you're in procurement and sourcing, you're very significantly focused on the left-hand side. And it's interesting to see where the challenges in the process come, and the different focuses and the different stakeholders. And if you're on the right-hand side, we know that, for example, accounts payable issues largely come from, are caused by issues in fulfillment, ordering, and so on. So that's kind of our context. So coming back to you, what's your scope of involvement in the P2P process? So select one of these. Do you have a genuine end-to-end source to pay scope of involvement? Again, this should be interesting to all of you. Do you have a primarily source to contract involvement, so procurement and sourcing focus? Do you have a buy to receive focus, which is really buying? Do you have a buy to pay focus, which is kind of P2P? Or you have an invoice to pay focus, which is accounts payable? Just select one of those, which is your primary scope of involvement. So you're 1, end-to-end, 2, source to contract, 3, buy to receive, 4, buy to pay, 5, invoice to pay. So should be, pretty straightforward. I mean, 3, 4, and 5 get a little bit, get close to each other, but you should get the sense of that. So let's see what we have here, these 5 groups. So the majority of you are end-to-end involvement. That is great. And that actually is a higher percentage than I expected, and a higher percentage we normally get. So that's great news. So of course, it could be just because it's number 1 and that's the first key you hit. But but thank you for that. That's good to know. And then the last invoice to pay was the second biggest. Interesting. Okay, so when we look at source to pay and purchase to pay, digitization and transformation, again, we ask leaders in the business, folks like yourselves, what are the aspirations and desired outcomes of improving, transforming, digitizing purchase to pay? And these 6 topics all come up. Now, very rarely do we get all 6 from one organization at one point in time, but pretty much every answer we get falls into one of these 6. So your priorities may vary, and these are not in any order of importance. But number 1, or the top one here, is reducing effort and cost of process operation. That's pretty classic. And there's a big focus of that in shared services and GBS. Optimizing working capital, which is about payment methods, payment schedules, payment terms. Managing risk, pretty clear what that is. Reducing maverick spend, so improving the control, pre-approval of spend. Reducing cycle time of process, which some people call making buying simple. And the last one's reducing cost of goods and services, which is a classic kind of sourcing and procurement focus. So, I think you'd look at those and say, yeah, we focus maybe on 2 or 3 of those at any point in time. So it's interesting to see where you sit there. Let's have a think about that. And then when we come to this digitization transformation, there is a host of technology out there, and it's and I haven't even put them all in, but it's quite substantial when you look at the ERP landscapes, end-to-end source-to-pay suites. You've got your source-to-contract capabilities, which typically are quite tends to be a lot of the same focus, source-to-pay, end-to-end. There's an interesting question there as well, of course. The buying cycle, the invoice-to-pay, accounts payable, and treasury. So there's a lot going on there. Now that's just there to kind of remind us about we're trying to make these big shifts. There's an awful lot of complexity, a lot of moving parts, and you have to make a lot of choices. But a little question for you. I'm not going to do this for all those technology stacks, but just again, so you know who you're amongst. What is your primary ERP? So primary system that supports the transaction processing of purchase requests through the payment. Is it 1 SAP, 2 Oracle, 3 Infor, 4 Microsoft, 5 other? You'll recognize already that there could only be 5 answers on the GoToWebinar. So you can have multiple choice in this one though, because I know some of you have multiple different ERP types as well as many different instances. So this is just to get a sense of where you are, primary ERP. So what do you, in your business, what's a primary ERP that supports your purchase to pay transactions? Which of those? Let's have a look at the old scoreboard. No surprise there. Massive majority SAPs, quite a large number of Oracle. And of course, others are always going to be big because we haven't got enough options to ask all the questions. But there you go. Thank you very much for that. Now, this is the core essence of this question, right? What is missing in delivering P2P transformation? We know it's a lot harder than it should be, and most organizations are struggling or certainly are challenged. So let's just start. I'm going to introduce some thoughts here, and I'm going to ask Steve for his input. So I gave you these 6 primary objectives, and just from my own discussions and research with organizations we talk to and work with around the world, these are the challenges I see. So reducing effort and cost of process operation sounds obvious. We can apply some technology to it, but the reality of the challenge is the total investment is high. The realistic return is an interesting question because it isn't what you're necessarily told by the vendor. And then the elapsed time to achieve that return. This is a genuine challenge. This isn't quite what you kind of expect when you start down this road. Optimizing working capital, well, we know what's involved, but it's one thing to have a strategy, but how do you execute? Because there's a lot of behavioral issues in here as well. And also you've got behavioral issues outside your own organization about your suppliers, for example. So aligning strategy and execution fast. Risk is about visibility and behavior. There's a lot of stuff about behavior in here, not a big surprise, but you know, this is what the challenges are. Reducing maverick spend sounds great. Just have, you know, no PO, no pay. That solves the problem, right? Well, the truth is communication, collaboration, internally and externally are challenging, and getting the right behavior and the consequences for the wrong behavior implemented and agreed and executed is equally hard. Reducing cycle time of the process, making buying simple sounds good, but if you think about it, there's unintended consequences of that, because if you make buying too easy, even in your personal life, you can find yourself with a very big credit card bill, and business terms, you can find yourself really spending more than you need to. And then the last one here, which is the sourcing and procurement focus, is a lot of people assume that procurement are about reducing unit costs and transaction costs, but really sourcing and procurement are there to maximize total business value and optimize the overall cost base, not individual transactional elements. So these are big challenges, and of course they start questioning our thoughts on all this. So that's me giving you a little preamble, but I'd really like to ask Steve now to come in and Steve, share with us the journey you've been on in your world as a GBS leader, experiencing, identifying, and addressing the missing link in P2P. Steve, welcome.
Great, thanks, Dan. And so first of all, everybody, thanks for joining. Great to have you all here in attendance. I'll just give a little bit of my background here. So I, after really kind of cutting my teeth in a number of accounting and controllership roles, I was introduced to shared services back in 1993, and these were kind of back in the, if you will, back in the dark ages of shared services, where everybody really kind of started with accounts payable. So that was my first remit, and we were dealing with boxes of paper, receiving records and invoices being sent to us. So you kind of fast forward over that, over my kind of 23 years or 25 years in that space to having the opportunity to build out a number of green and brownfield centers across the globe, dealing with multiple ERPs, right? Multiple stakeholders, of course, big business, complexity around business units, and then as Dan talked a little bit earlier about kind of the complexity around the technology landscape, I had the opportunity to put in a bunch of enabling technology solutions across all the functions, but obviously today we're talking about P2P. And when we focus specifically on P2P, right, over those 25 years in shared services and 28 total, I spent all that time with 3 companies. And as I mentioned before, kind of setting up, managing, being operationally responsible for P2P functions on 5 continents, serving over 50 countries. At kind of my last role in GBS's shared services, or excuse me, at Thermo Fisher, had a $15 billion plus annual spend, both direct and indirect purchasing. So, and lots of technology solutions, very complex ERP landscapes. And as all of us, right, can attest to, a lot of focus on KPIs and driving the business through data. And so if we look at many of our P2P universes, right, there's a lot of systems involved. And this is just an example, right, of a couple handfuls here. And this landscape, this universe can get infinitely more complex as you put in M&A activity and multi-ERP environments. So I think just acknowledgement here, right, that we're all dealing with a very, very complex landscape. And with that, right, and this was my experience, right, is that I tend to focus on KPIs and working with my stakeholders and working with my internal teams, right, is that I always kind of thought in the early days, hey, more is better. Let me dazzle them with these dashboards and these metrics that, as this cartoon kind of shows, we may or may not know everything we're measuring and what it actually means. A lesson learned here, as I'll talk about in a few minutes, was really focusing on the critical KPIs, the ones that really drive action in the business value, as well as keeping our stakeholders' view kind of in the forefront. And for those of you that deal with business stakeholders, day in and day out, like I think we all do, a lot of times that view can be, hey, it's not that hard, right? Hey, you get an invoice, you pay it, right? What can be difficult? What's so difficult about that? And this is a classic Dunning-Kruger effect. So if you've been on any of our webinars in the past, right, we talk about Dunning-Kruger a number of times, and the main premise here is that kind of the less experience and the less you know about a process and the way things work, the more confident you are about how it does and should work. And as you gain more experience, like I'm sure those of us on this call, you become less and less confident, which is this kind of the middle of this experience curve. That's not a bad place to be, right? And as you gain more experience and your confidence will come back up, but the reality of it is here from our stakeholders' perspective, there's this idea of, hey, just get it done. And I know I've heard that many times. And so the kind of the key question here that I think we all take a step back and ask ourselves, hey, what does, for me and my processes, what does good look like? I think historically, right, our focus had always been on what happened, right? What's the history lesson here? Let me really gauge, let me use that to gauge and drive my what does good look like answer. And that's just not good enough today, right? Today we have lots of expectations around some exotic large scale strategies that I'm sure we've all been a part of, whether it's e-invoicing or a Cooper and a Ariba rollout or a new ERP rollout, et cetera. I mean, you kind of come into this with this vision of, hey, yeah, I got this kind of slick new tool or application here. And in this case, hey, it may look like you got a Tesla behind there. When the reality of it is, right, you've got this massive city bus that's got maybe a cool little front end that would dazzle you to begin with, but at the end of the day, isn't delivering what you'd expected. And we also talk about budget, budget constraints. And we talk budget. A lot of people talk budget or money, but it's just resource constraints and resource overruns, right? That oftentimes, right, this means that you start cutting features or cutting, the bells and whistles a little bit, that resulted in a misalignment of what your vision was and what the reality of it is. I think this is a funny little picture of what you could end up with when you're looking at a nice front end, but you end up with the inability to deliver what was sold. And here, hey, insert slapping sound here, right? I mean, I've been there before, right? Where I look at what we ended up with and put my head in my hands and just kind of shake my head and kind of, geez, how did we get here? So the reality of the environment we're all working in today, right, is that it's imperative to be agile. Not only do we have to see what's in front of us and understand kind of where we're going, right? If you look at this image, but also hey, we all have blind spots. There's things you can't predict, but we have to have some sort of key indicators or predictive indicators that can tell us what's coming up behind us. Also, you look at the speed limit sign there, and we've got policies and controls and regulatory requirements that are kind of changing on us. Some we may know about, some that come up as a surprise. So I think that the key here as we move forward in today's business environment is that we have to be aware of so many things and have so many have to have the ability to be predictive. And this touches on the kind of real delicate balancing act in P2P. That's kind of this performance and productivity. Are you focused on efficiency or effectiveness, right? What are you looking at mainly? Internal KPIs and kind of gauging yourself against your past performance, or are you looking at external benchmarks? And another key one here that I always found was a challenge is, what's the working practice? What's my reality today and how things get done versus how it's documented or how we say it should be done when you think of like the standard operating procedure item there. And at the end of the day, right, this formula at the bottom is something I, kind of always took myself and my teams back to around, hey, we have to do everything we can to keep this simple, not just for us. Obviously, it's great for us if we can, the more we can simplify, but it's for our stakeholders and the users of our process. And then this idea of accountability is that not only are we keeping ourselves accountable, but it's important and really imperative that we keep our stakeholders and those that are adjacent to us in the process, upstream and downstream, keep them accountable, because what their output is our input, and then obviously what our output is their input. So that level of accountability is not just looking inside our own teams, it's looking across the function and across the process. And then action orientation, absolutely critical to have a working culture, and whether we talk about KPIs or just the way we go about our day-to-day business, is that we're focused on action versus kind of just rhetoric, if you will. And if you're focused on these three things, I think this is kind of the key formula for improvement. So now the next bit I want to talk about, and I'll use this in context of an analogy around athletics and elite athletes or elite sports teams. Very seldom will an elite athlete think of an Olympic athlete or think of an elite, high level sports team of any, in any genre, if you will. Very seldom they're going to go under massive transformations. Say, hey, we're gonna peel all this back to the bare bones and foundations and start over, right? I mean, that is not a recipe for success. What they find themselves doing is they're tweaking things, right? They're looking at the details. It's this focus on the 1% improvement, because when you're already at that level, which I assume a lot of you that are on this call are pretty good, otherwise you wouldn't be attending this call and looking for the answers to these questions. But the idea here is that instead of focusing on a massive transformation and rebuild, it's this idea of a 1% improvement, whether it's a day, this math is on a daily basis, and it's almost a 38 times improvement, but whether it's a day, a week, a month, right? It's this idea of this constant focus on incremental improvement. And one of the ways I did that, that I found was the most effective, was focusing on this concept of defectivity. And I know a lot of us, you hear when you look at, you talk to benchmarking firms or you talk to really anybody out there that's trying to sell you something. It's this idea of productivity, world-class, top quartile, top 10%. And I think at a certain point, right, there's a certain level of productivity that's table stakes. But when you get there, what I found was that the way you continue to improve and focus on getting better day in and day out is focusing on this idea of cutting out defects. And my goal was to become world-class at resolving defects within my process and within my adjacent processes, because at the end of the day, I found that was directly correlated to my ability to increase productivity. So here's, I think we can all relate to this next slide a little bit. If we're out there starting to take a little road trip, we're on the road heading out, and I think, you think of your main KPIs as hey, how fast am I going? So when can I expect to get there, and how hard's my engine working? Is anything kind of at a very high level going sideways there? And think of those as kind of your key productivity KPIs. But like a lot of times, what we're missing, as I mentioned earlier, is these indicators, these in this case, low oil or pressure and levels that tell us, hey, you may not be stuck on the side of the road right now, but if you don't address this, you will be. You will be on vendor credit hold, and you'll have business unit leaders screaming at you. And I think, I know I've been there. And so those indicators are absolutely critical to be able to predict those things that are sneaking up behind you, that aren't going right. Looking under the hood of an engine, just sometimes kind of the walkarounds or walkabouts we would do, right? Is where you're like, hey, I can pick up the hood and look and say that's an engine, or I can walk around my center and say, yep, hey, everybody looks like they're working pretty hard, right? The phones are ringing, people are answering emails, processing invoices, but until you dive into the detail and really understand it and have some of these defect indicators, you move out of the road before you know it. So we talk about what's missing, and that's kind of the core of this. And here's some examples of some leadership lessons I learned. Boy, I would love to have had some visibility to some of this historically day one. But that's the beautiful thing about learning lessons, is you only get experience by going through the pain. Accountability, I talked about it before, absolutely critical. That there's a culture and a focus on accountability end to end. People from a team in processing a people perspective, having this action-oriented culture. I just talked about the defectivity focus on process, and then the 1% improvement kind of culture to set around performance. And just very quickly on data. I mean, many of us, right? We have so much data at our disposal. I think I would argue that the mass majority of stuff we either have exposure to, we have in our hands, or we get from someone else, we may not use or know what to even do with. And so a focus on data, and a lesson I learned on data is we got to take the data that's important to us now, and the data that helps us drive from an insight to an action, because that action is really what's driving the process improvement. And then finally, on skills and habits, and what we're trying to build within our teams, is this idea of partnering and stakeholder collaboration, and really focusing on the voice of the customers, as I've called it historically, the VOC, and understanding kind of where their heads are, so we can address issues. And I love this quote. This is a kind of a long-winded quote here, but I think the first sentence really says it all, right? It's that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, attributed obviously to Steve Jobs, and that this kind of talks to previously the defectivity journey a little bit, is that you really have to dive into the detail and understand what's really going on deep to make something simple. But I think the ultimate goal for all of us is providing services and focusing on productivity, is to make things as simple and as understandable as we possibly can. So this drives me into kind of this next concept around Pareto. And so just I think we've all heard of the Pareto approach, kind of the the classic 80-20 rule to improvement, and that don't forsake good or great, right, for perfection, because that's I would say that's kind of a fool's game. But in this case, right, we look at the Pareto approach as it relates to strategy. You think about that red line. These are your long-term, typically multi-year, transformational projects and efforts, right? We think about those big exotic strategies I talked about earlier. Think about that as the red line. You're usually sinking a lot of cost, resources, time into this before you're really getting any benefit, or even coming close to crossing that value axis there. And the idea of these Pareto projects are that these are smaller projects, smaller in time commitment and resource commitment, quicker to pay back, right? They add some incremental value as you're moving through, and you can do more. The beautiful thing about these Pareto projects is you can do more than one of these at a time, right? Because the resource suck isn't that significant, or shouldn't be. And that another bit here with the Pareto projects is that these do and should inform your overall strategy. So ultimately, the focus of these Pareto projects is that not only do they inform kind of how your larger strategic project should be going, but it should improve it and make it better. Either shorten the time to value or increase the value once you get there. And I think the other big thing here with these Pareto projects is that as you do these, your teams, your organization becomes more confident in their ability to deliver, right? So that confidence increases is imperative, and it really demonstrates agility. So it kind of sets up, I'll say, your reputation right within the organization to drive improvement, to drive improvement quickly. So if I take a kind of a step back and say, hey, I wish that, these are the three things I wish I'd known back in 1993 when I was dealing with truckloads of paper. Is this whole idea around Dunning-Kruger and having, ensuring that not only I, but also stakeholders and people that I worked with had some humility around their knowledge of a process and how it worked. This idea of tenacity around, hey, let's kind of manage that, the set of expectations, and then also our own internal kind of allure and excitement around these big exotic strategic strategies. And let's focus on the 1% a day, right? Because that's where the real value comes in. And I think finally, as I just introduced kind of the Pareto approach, is this idea around simplicity and speed, and that the ultimate strategy is being simple, speed, which equates to agility, and is really I say the key reputation enhancer, if you will, for your organization. Will allow you to do even more going forward and expand your remit for shared services or global business services. So with that, I appreciate the time. I'll turn it back over to Dan to kind of take us home here.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was great to hear your experiences and the kind of the realizations and the tough lessons along the way. So that was great. Thank you. Everyone, please, I'm sure you've got questions on what Steve was talking about there. So please pop your questions into the panel now. And as I say, it's going to make this as valuable as it can be for you. So thank you for that. So just in terms of applying what Steve shared with us, there's a few things I want to say here. I mean, one is this thing about time. We spend a lot of focus in business thinking about the, how are we going to improve stuff? What's the value, the improved value, the cost savings and all the rest of it, and what's it going to take in cost and effort to get there? And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about, or enough effort thinking about the time involved. So if I said to you, you know what, you can have $100,000 next July. I'll give you $100,000 next July. What would you take right now instead of that? And because a lot of things can go wrong. I could get hit by a bus. I might not have $100,000, all sorts of things. And you might say, you know what, I might take $20,000 for that right now. If you got it, might take 1,000. I don't know, but it's a lot less. And it's the same is true in business, and that's kind of the essence of the net present value kind of discussion when you're looking at investments. But very few of us get involved in the kind of the detail of that. The reality is, if you've got an initiative that's going to take 3 years to deliver, and it's going to give us a $30 million return, what is that worth right now? Well, it's not worth $30 million right now because it hasn't happened. So, and I think it's really important for us to recognize that the time decays the value delivered. So a big number and a big ticket and a big win means nothing until you deliver it. And I think we've got to get better at realizing that. And that's why that Pareto principle is so important. So Steve talked about these three things. He talked about the cognitive bias, Dunning-Kruger. He talked about the 1%, continuous improvement every day, being better today than we were yesterday and be better tomorrow than we were today. And this idea of Pareto, yes, it's good to have a strategy, but we've got to deliver value fast in very short-term cycles. And how do we deliver that? These three things. And I would argue that some of this is requiring imagination to both build a plan for a strategy, but to divide and conquer into Pareto principle elements that we can deliver value very quickly. We've got to have the motivation, to have the staying power to be able to deliver the 1%, because it's hard. The reality is it's hard to do this stuff. And then the inspiration to lead and execute teams, stakeholders, customers, and all the rest of it around that. So these are kind of very core things. And these three phenomena, if you like, are what drive both success and lack of success or failure. So it's kind of really, really key things. These are three kind of key issues. So if you think about, your organization and the capabilities you have for process execution, improvement, and transformation. There's don't be kind of daunted by this. It's quite a busy diagram, but the green pieces around the outside are the soft skills, if you like. This is how we organize, how we support the key processes. So whether it's P2P, O2C, record to report, and all the rest of it. And in here is a core piece about process task execution, which is driven through ERP and process-specific applications and cloud services and all the rest of it. And then a bit above that is how we manage the process and get continuous improvement, the 1% a day. And then we've got this piece on the right about data, and then our transformational approaches, which we might be considering process mining, might be considering intelligent process automation, cloud ERP, S4HANA, all that good stuff. So it's kind of a helpful picture. So I want to talk through these three phenomena in each of these. So start with transformation. It's a topic of the day, right? Everyone's talking about transformation and people are trying to execute. Now, the thing about transformation is an important thing, and we've got to work it out. But let's look at those three phenomena. Dunning-Kruger is at its most powerful here because the cognitive bias of the confidence of executing against these things is very high, even though we've not done it before. And that's the reality of it. Now, when you go through the experience and you get a little bit more jaded, you get a bit more realistic. So, it's no secret, again, one of our customers was saying, we've just done this massive S4HANA enabled transformation. But the truth is, we bought all the story beforehand, but the truth is the new problems are still the old problems. We needed to do it and we're not regretting it, but we were on the left-hand side of Dunning-Kruger when we started that. Transformational activities are not continuous improvement. They're not 1% a day, not until they turn into business as usual. And these are classic red line initiatives. So you've got to be very careful. How do we turn them into Pareto capabilities? We've got to find a way of delivering the Pareto capabilities. Otherwise, you're going to find that in 2.5, 3 years' time, you're still doing stuff, and the business is saying, so where's that value you promised me? And then on the process management, continuous improvement, we've got, we need to make sure that GBS as a service or shared services and finance operations have got some overall ability to manage their business. You've got some one-off visualization reporting, but for the core processes, you want actionable process insights that tell you every day how things are going, what's wrong, what's the workload, what are the barriers, what's stopping progress, what are the defects, and what are the risks. Now, what's good news here is cognitive bias-wise, Dunning-Kruger, you're right in the middle of the experience curve. You're at the bottom. That's actually a sweet spot. Bottom of the curve is rarely a sweet spot, but in this case, it is a sweet spot. You're in the middle of 1% better every day. You can make it happen. And it is absolutely the essence of Pareto. And then you get into process and task execution, right? So you've got the kind of the core ERP, and you've got ERP extensions that might have invoice management, it might be Resoft or Vim or these kind of things. You might have delivered some RPA bots to integrate some elements which were manually intensive. You might have some process-specific apps like Coupa, Ariba, Basware, whatever. You might have some cloud services like an e-invoicing service. Now, these are really good, but you've got to think about, for each one of these, where do we sit on cognitive bias? Now, can we do something quick with our ERP just to turn on configuration settings to make a process work a lot quicker and be on the right side of all of those three phenomena? Or are we going to go into implement a process-specific application with the belief that we're going to have all our suppliers enabled within 12 months when no one on God's green earth has done it in 12 months? That's the point. So you've got to think about it. And these three phenomena I find very helpful to play into each of the areas of this: transformation, process management, continuous improvement, and process task execution. The key message here is, we can't keep thinking the same old ways and expect to have dramatically different results. So we've got to think differently, right? Which I think is another Steve Jobs quote. So let's think very hard about Pareto. It's absolutely critical. Now, when you look at this, it looks obvious, right? Yeah, we all know about the 80-20 rule. We all think about that. The truth is, it's not as obvious as it looks, because actually we don't. And if you just look at your portfolio of initiatives, you'll probably realize there's an awful lot of red line stuff there, which isn't delivering business value in the coming weeks or months. So we've got to work that through. So we've got to think it through, and we've got to use it, and we've got to socialize this around the organization so we can deliver value, as Steve said, in that way. And it's not just about execution. We talk a lot about the art of execution. It's not about doing stuff and being busy. It's about delivering the outcomes, which is a different thing. How do we make sure the outcomes, the business value is delivered, not just a system or a capability? So it makes it should be no surprise that if you do this Pareto well, it can make your overall strategy better. But the big thing for a business stakeholder is it mitigates this kind of trough of despair of, we were told how wonderful it's going to be. We're going to have straight through processing. All our suppliers are going to be electronic. Everyone's using POs. But it's, we're 3 years in and, we're 5% of the way. That's the key thing. So there are no quick fixes. There's no magic bullets. And this is true. It comes in every discipline, whether it's sports, whether it's music, whether it's medicine, or whether it is business processes. There isn't one easy fix. And I think it's really important for us to consider that. So we've talked through this. I know you've asked questions. I want to take those questions. And I also we've been had some great results with some word cloud input from participants in our webcast. I'm going to answer that in about 60 seconds. So we've got some questions for you here. If you've got any more questions come in, pop me an email. Let's see what we're doing here. So let's have one. Okay, question here. You suggest that the missing link of these 3 behavioral traits. How do you, in your experience, develop these? I assume you mean the positive traits of those 3. Okay, well, from my point of view, I would encourage you, those 3 topics, Dunning-Kruger, the 1% a day, and Pareto, I'd encourage you to weave those into your discussions with team members, stakeholders, customers, business partners, all the time. Not once, but weave it into the psyche by making a consistent exposure and dialogue around those topics and what the experience is. Steve, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, just real quick, I think that's critical. But and also, I'd say what I did is I would start with some of these, start with small, maybe week-long mini projects, right, to kind of develop that muscle, if you will, and increase confidence, as I mentioned earlier. So that these concepts, right, just become a way of thinking in a way that you address issues and address problems.
All right, thanks. I like this one. I can see the value in addressing these 3 themes, but in our GBS and IT function, have invested substantial money in some red line strategy technologies, which are anything but Pareto or 1%. But we're encouraged to focus our efforts around these. What do you suggest? That's kind of interesting. There's a whole question about sunk costs and investments and whether you're getting results at speed. If you've got a strategy which isn't delivering enough or fast enough, you need to make some changes. But I just encourage you, because this gets very political, and I'd encourage you to get that Pareto thinking in the discussions with stakeholders and management and executive owners, bearing in mind that Pareto doesn't replace strategic options. It complements them. So it may be a nice way of softening the blow that these big investments aren't really delivering at the pace we hope them to. Steve, any thoughts on that?
I think you nailed it. That's the approach I would take, of course.
Okay, so I'm going to do one more, and then we're going to do this word cloud thing, and we'll close down. So, how do you know if and how we're suffering from these problems today? What are the visible symptoms? Okay, interesting. Steve, you want to take a stab?
Yeah, I think what I would say is that one key way it worked for me, or that I looked at, was if I had light adoption, right? If I looked at business units or looked at suppliers where I'm implementing, whether it's a process change or a new requisition tool, you think of, Ariba, Coupa, et cetera, or invoicing with suppliers, is that if I was having a hard time with adoption and with really pick up on the business side or with our suppliers, that was a key indicator that something, there's a lack of understanding, a lack of effective communication, just they're not aware of what of what's expected of them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think also I've definitely seen a few situations where the executive sponsor for a major P2P initiative, who was very active and visible for the kind of the business case piece and the technology implementation, go very quiet or even AWOL once the real challenges start to occur, and it got very, very quiet and lonely out there. And you can understand why that might be. But obviously, you can get creative by asking executives, how can we get better operationally day by day? We can ask those questions, and while we're delivering a strategy, how do we do this? So I think there's some interesting thoughts there. Right, we've got one more before we close down. One little thing here. So what I want you to do is to think, in your view and experience, what's the single biggest inhibitor to Pareto principle execution in P2P? So improving the performance of P2P in that Pareto principle: short, sharp, big impact, short effort. So I want you to think about just a few words, a few nouns, a couple of adjectives maybe, but 4 or 5 words, not chapter or verse. And what's going to happen is we're going to close the webcast. You're going to see this little window come up. So you're going to press close, and then this is going to come up. This very question is going to come up. I just like you to answer. That's going to come up another window. Just pop your answers in there. What I commit to do is we'll assemble all that. We'll put it together as a word cloud. We'll share it with you, because what's interesting is this is not our view. This is your view. So you're going to get, we're crowdsourcing, democratically crowdsourcing opinion and experience. So please do it. I appreciate your time. I said it was 40 minutes. It's been 45. I do apologize. You've lost 5 minutes of your life. I hope it's been a good 5 or 45 minutes. Thank you very much. Please fill in the this little question as we close down. It's been a pleasure. I hope you found it useful, thought-provoking, and even enjoyable. Thank you. And thank you, Steve.
Of course, thank you.